Welcome to another episode of the Limitless Life podcast. I am your host, Kyle Smith, and with me today is the one and only Max Laroque. He has an awesome, badass name. Max, thank you very much for being here.
Welcome Thank you very much for having me, Kyle.
My pleasure. So tell the guests, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
So as Kyle mentioned, my name is Max Laroque. My full name is actually Maxime Laroque. So I'm French background. Don't ask me if I speak French because I don't. I was born in a French family, but I don't actually speak French. But my name is Max Laroque. I've been a personal trainer as of 13 years on February 10th, which is pretty crazy. I run an online coaching business for personal training. I am a certified life coach, which is predominantly what my online coaching is actually more dictated around, is kind of the full 4D spectrum of fitness, and that it's not just about physical fitness. The mental health plays a massive role in truly changing your lifestyle and living a purposeful and authentic life. I also am the co-owner of Free Fitness, which is a gym here in Edmonton, Alberta. We actually recently just won YEG's Best Gym in Edmonton Award for 2022, which is pretty exciting. I got an adorable Fox Red Lab named Lucy. We walk all day long, and kind of like we talked about beforehand, Kyle, I walk a lot as well. But yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, that's pretty much my life.
Fantastic. You're also the host of a podcast, right? And it is Squats and Sober Thoughts, I believe, right?
Yes, you bet. Just rebranded. Took a good kind of 8 months off. Ran it with a prior host beforehand, but just kind of went in different directions. So I just recently recorded my first episode actually this week here. Part of why I forgot to mention that was that I haven't recorded an episode in so long. So yes, I am the host of the Squats and Sober Thoughts podcast. Obviously, as you can imagine in the title, I am a little bit over 2 years alcohol free, and technically I am on day 20 of no cannabis as well. So yeah.
I love it. So I listened to your first episode and it was called Compassionate Relapse. The just makes it sound cool. And there's a couple things that we were talking about beforehand that was really cool. And congruence was something I brought up, and you also have it as authenticity. Mm-hmm. And I completely agree that authenticity and congruence is the same. It's acting and behaving in the same manner. So saying what you mean, what you say, saying what you mean, and acting in a way that is congruent with that.
Yeah.
So I know you talked about it on your podcast, and I would encourage people to go and check it out themselves. But there is something that you talked about with, we were talking about just congruence. You were feeling guilt and shame, and that was an indicator of maybe it's a habit that you should probably let go. We were talking about cannabis specifically. Maybe it's a habit that you should probably let go. Would you be able to chat about that? Let's shoot the shit.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, as mentioned, a lot of my online coaching is in the realm of life coaching as well. And for me, I smoked cannabis for 11 years straight, all day long, to the point where I was absolutely a functioning drug addict. I know some people put a negative connotation to that word and think it's a little bit extreme, but the reality is, when the intention is as negative as it was for the time that I used it, it was very much an addictive, drug addict-esque way, to the point where I actually was to the level of I could go to work and you would have no idea I was even stoned. And when you start being radically honest with yourself and actually acknowledging that, like, that's not a very good way to be living your life, it really started to eat away at me. So that's actually why I decided to get sober back in December of 2020. So I kicked my alcohol and cannabis use December 1st, 2020. Was clean, as mentioned, a little bit over 2 years alcohol free. And I went a good year and a bit with no smoking weed, no cannabis use, dope, whatever words you want to infill there.
My grandfather would say wacky tobacco.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So for me, it was just one of those ones that when I first experimented with it again, it was my birthday, 2021. And I remember smoking and was like, fuck, this is awesome. Like, this is the best. Had a great time with it. Just, put my phone away, ate a bunch of food, munched out. Like, it was the intent behind it was truly to heighten experience my birthday and just actually celebrate the changes that I had made in the last year of my life, because there was massive shifts in my life from a financial standpoint, from my mental health, my physical health. Pretty much every aspect of my life had improved. And for me, I went another 2 months after my birthday without smoking it again. And then I think it was for a friend's birthday, smoked it again. Great time, good intention, right? There was no abusive aspect to it. And then it started to slip, and it then went to once a month. It then went to once a weekend, and then next thing you know, I'm smoking every day again. And where the authenticity aspect of this conversation goes is the fact that on a daily basis, I'm helping people to kick their cannabis usage and kick their alcohol usage and kick their addictions to social media and porn and dating and pretty much just avoidance of their shit in general. And I just started to feel incredibly guilty and basically just riddled with shame all the time, because of the fact that I'm actively helping these people to kick these addictions that I know I'm doing behind closed doors. And so at first, I mean, the first like 2 months or so, I was justifying it in the sense of it was making me quite creative. And it was never to the point where it was prior, where I was doing it and going to work or anything like that. It was just, I'm done work for the day, 6, 7 p.m. I'm going to go take Lucy for a walk, smoke weed, and all these ideas would come to my brain. And so, an idea for content that I wanted to create, whether it be a tweet post, whether it be a video for the next day, I would just literally walk and talk into my phone. So I would just make a voice note in my phone, and the next day I would create something around that. After about 2 months, the spike in dopamine each night started to really affect my motivation and my drive the following day, to the point where I was still having these creative ideas, but I wasn't acting on them the next day. And then the negative thoughts about myself really started to take over in that sense. So every morning I'd wake up and I would tell myself I wasn't going to smoke. And then every night I would smoke. And then every morning I would tell myself I'm not going to smoke. And then it just kind of perpetuated itself into becoming way more of an avoidance tactic for dealing with the negative thoughts about myself. The lack of self-belief, the lack of self-worth, the basically lack of self-love, essentially. And that was my way to avoid actually doing the things that needed to be done to improve that, which would be, actively seeing my therapist more frequently, actively doing, the things that need to be done behind closed doors, which is, the actions behind closed doors, which in my case was, eliminating cannabis from my life again and actually living an authentic life behind closed doors, and not just putting it out onto social media as if I was doing all the right things, full well knowing that I was not doing the right things.
I think so. I always use congruence instead of authenticity, and we've agreed that both of them are the same thing. And what we were chatting with pre-call, pre-show, is we were talking, or something I think was really important that I wanted to bring up again, is how incongruence or inauthenticity and not being active in, or actually, and not actively participating in the progress and utilizing another activity, another behavior, another substance as permission to procrastinate on the thing to do. And that could very well be also intentionally like, hey, maybe I should like sit down and think to myself, how am I the problem here? And I think that the avoidance, that avoidance is toxic and corrosive. Like, I think that over time it becomes more and more corrosive. And for myself, I've gone over a year without alcohol. I do cannabis. I partake in the cannabis, but similar to what you were talking about, as long as there's good intentions and I don't recognize it as a way of just escaping or a way of just getting out of doing the things that I know I should be doing, I keep that self-awareness. I make sure that those things are in alignment, where if there's congruence, if I'm still practicing as I'm preaching, because I'm not telling anyone to give up anything that they don't want. What I am saying for folks is to make sure that they are not depending on something external for them to do things, because when we depend on things that are outside of us, are externally, then they make the rules. It makes the rules. When we can depend on ourselves internally, then we make the rules. And I think having that congruence and knowing that we can keep promises to ourselves, and that's the thing as well, is I think of Seth Rogen. Seth Rogen probably smokes more weed than anyone, or Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, I know for a fact, definitely does. But both of them are still able to do, they're able to meet their standards while still partaking in a substance that they prefer or an activity that they prefer. So I don't think that there's any sort of, it's the intention behind it. It's never the thing itself that I think is the tricky part. And I think having that void, go for it.
I was just gonna say, and I agree, and that's one thing I did want to just touch too, because like we spoke about, I don't want to be this sobriety warrior. And again, the reality is that only you know what the intention behind it, and you are the only one that knows of the positive and or negative repercussions that are coming from the behavior itself. I mean, full disclosure, 85 to 90% of my close friends still smoke weed. It's not that I'm going to ostracize myself and, just completely become reclusive and only hang out with my dog and only hang out with people who are fully sober. Like, that's like kind of what we spoke about. It's the difference of sobriety and recovery. And like, I'm not this sobriety warrior. I'll never push sobriety on anyone, but at the same time, I will push good decisions on everyone.
What was that? There was a fella, and I think that this is a pretty interesting kind of just perspective. But I think it's interesting that you were mentioning about some sobriety warriors where you're proud of what you accomplished. You did 2 years without alcohol, and you've gone a solid chunk of time without smoking weed. And then there's this other fella that's like, I've gone 7 years without crack. Like, I think that there is now this one's going off the fly on this one. I think that there is just this insecurity of I'm not sure exactly where it is. There's something stewing, but there's an innate insecurity where maybe it's trying to win an award for, how was it that you said in the pre-call? You said it pretty well in that one.
Well, it was essentially, so I got sober December 2020. So we had just got into our second lockdown here in Alberta. And so at that point, there's no in-person AA meetings or NA meetings or any of those things. So I was in a couple different Facebook groups that were about sobriety recovery, yada, yada, yada. And, similar to AA, I don't know if you've had any experience with AA or know anyone who does, but, you kind of have to go in, tell your story, be a part of the group. So one of the things in one of the groups was like, basically just like sort of tell your story. And I had recently come out publicly with mine, and that was just sort of a big thing for me, being baby child of the family, of a RCMP family, and, wanting to be seen, heard, validated. But anyway, so I basically just copy and pasted that post and put it in here, or in the group there. And this guy was like fucking weed. Like I'm 7 years sober of heroin. And it was just like, do you want me to do like the wiser slow clap for you? Like, bravo, you fucking douchebag. Like, what was the intent behind that? Like, do you now think, and that's where I use the term like sobriety warrior comes in, where like, it doesn't matter if you've been sober for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. If you haven't done anything to, further your perspectives or your insight on the world, improve your relationship with yourself, improve your relationship with your family, your spouse, your loved ones, anything along your financial health, anything along those lines, well, okay, you're sober, but you're still a fucking dickhead, right? Like, for me, it's that distinction between sobriety and recovery, where you're actively participating in improving your emotional, spiritual, physical, mental, financial health. And then there's sobriety, where you're just a dickhead who basically uses that badge of honor that, well, I've been sober for X amount of time, so that means that I am better than you, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, again, you still cheat on your wife, you still abuse your children, you still abuse your finances. You still abuse yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally. Cool. You don't drink or use substance anymore, but you haven't done any of the actual work that comes with getting sober and going into recovery. And that's where it's almost ironic. People think, oh, I got sober, like my shit's better now. And it's like, no, if anything, you just have more awareness about the work that needs to be done to improve all of those areas of your life that you've been avoiding for God knows how long.
I totally agree with that. It's actually funny with the sober warrior or sobriety warrior. I find it's very similar to like the idea of a social justice warrior. And I have this kind of perspective, and it's never the thing. It's just like anything else, I guess. It's not the thing. It's not a protest. It's not sobriety or not sobriety. It's not like, I believe that's always, if you want to get an idea of the behaviors of a person, look at the intention behind it. And I think when there's ill intentions, the best indicator of ill intentions is double standards. And I think that there is a solid chunk of folks that have more so a pseudo morality, where it's not a true morality where they have that congruence and authenticity. It is a pseudo morality that they take on because they view themselves as morally superior than their peers.
Yeah.
So the best indicator in my mind ties into the exact same thing. Is the actions following up what you're saying? Because this is one thing, like one thing with, like, let's say Bill Gates, for example, super huge with climate change. I think the climate is definitely changing, and I think that we are attributing to things, and that I think that we should just take care of planet Earth. Like, it's the only globe that we have for now, I suppose, but it's the only globe that we have. So I just think that it should be taken care of. Like, pick up your garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, pick up your garbage, simple. But for Bill Gates, for example, he has all the emissions and stuff for private jets, so on and so forth. And he says he has like a lower green footprint than most people. But I think to myself, I'm like, it's hard for me to follow someone like Bill Gates saying that you should take care of the planet when the actions do not line up with what the words are.
Yeah.
And I think that pseudo morality, that incongruence, that low, I personally, in my opinion, say that's a very low standard of living and very low expectations of ourselves as individuals.
And a lot of it is too, it's people chasing validation, right? So, the sobriety warrior, well, I've been sober for 7 years. Cool. Like, do you want me to validate you so that you feel better about yourself? Right? Like, it means nothing if your actions don't align with, who you say you are, who you claim you want to be. Are you in alignment with your core values, or are you just sober and you label yourself as sober for X amount of years? So now you're better than someone who's only been sober for 5 years. Like, okay, cool. You're just searching validation. That's all it is. Right. And you get a lot of like the justice warriors, the social media justice warriors who are like, fuck, just go to see a psychologist and fucking therapist, deal with your goddamn shit. Like, that's all it is you're just chasing validation via online. And like, that's the interesting part of our society online nowadays, is like, there's so many things you can't say because it's going to invalidate someone. Well, fuck, the more your audience grows, like, it is impossible to validate every single individual's personal childhood experiences, traumas, and things that they have dealt with. So, like, if you're trying to be yourself and you're trying to put out an authentic message, you got to get really comfortable knowing that there's going to be fucking people that hate you. Even if your intent behind it is to put out this compassionate, empathetic message that's trying to help others, there's still going to be some fucking social media justice warrior out there who gets fucking butthurt, calls you an asshole, calls you a privileged piece of shit, blah, 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 blah. As you can tell, I've gotten a fair bit over the last 2 years. And it, like, at first, it really got to me, to be honest, because of the fact that it made me feel like I was doing it for validation. I was doing it for the wrong reasons. And it actually wasn't until I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, that I started to learn more about trauma and the effects it actually has on your brain from like a neurological wiring standpoint. And trauma, especially childhood trauma that hasn't been resolved, like literally wires your brain differently. So even though I could be putting out, a lot of thought and intent behind this message of like self-improvement in whatever capacity, and I write this out and I believe that I'm going to help someone with this, I am going to help someone with this. But at the same time, there's also going to be someone out there or people out there that will not see it in the same way based off of the way that their neural wiring is wired to perceive the world. Right. And it's sort of your reactivity to what I'm saying is just how you feel about your inner self. And it is, if you do, especially people who do attack people online, where it's just like, God, you are so hurt. Like, why, what benefit do you have like attacking me online just because of the fact that you believe these things about yourself, evidently? Because if you're going to attack somebody online, it's just a reflection about how you feel about yourself. That's all it is.
I think that our perceptions are reflections of ourselves.
Yeah,
So
100%.
how we perceive the world is a direct reflection of what we think of the world and what we think of ourselves. So what we think of the most often, what we see the most often is what we're going to keep on funneling, right? And I think it's really interesting when the folks are so resistant to a well-intentioned message, and they're I even if there is absolute truth behind it, the humans have a confirmation bias as well. Or is it confirmation bias? Yeah. So we have a confirmation bias where no matter how accurate the information is, no matter how many doctors, whatever kind of people that we see, even if it's the exact same person in the exact same point in time, or at least fairly similar, can have two different trajectories, right? Based off of whether they're okay with changing their perception or not, or fixed mindset, growth mindset, I guess, with Carol Dweck.
Well, that's the validation though, right? Like people,
yeah,
they need that validation. Obviously, Kyle and I were both in Phoenix at the beginning of December for a conference, and one of the speakers was Lane Norton. And it was hilarious last week. He had posted something like very simple, very much just, law of thermodynamics and calories in, calories out. Like that's how you lose weight, whether you want to believe it or not. And in the comment section, this fucking individual just went off and how because she has PCOS that it's so much harder and blah, 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 blah. And he was just like, this is a social media post. Like this isn't, I wrote a tweet about the law of thermodynamics. This isn't, there's no way for me to add every single contextual nuance that is involved with the traumas and the experiences that you've personally felt. But the fact that you took the time to personally attack me because this fucking tweet didn't validate you literally just goes to show how much work you actually have to do on yourself. Because if you had done the work on yourself, had been doing the work on yourself, you could read that post and just move the fuck on and not let it ruin your day and then make 10 stories throughout the day bitching about fucking Lane Norton, how he's a fucking asshole and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, they just crave that validation. And if you don't validate them, then you're a piece of shit, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh my God, like it's a crazy society we live in right now, to be blatantly honest. And there's a lot of wounded individuals out there online who
wounded warriors, not like actual wounded warriors.
Like, well, yeah, like, but like feel the need to attack people who are literally just stating actual facts. Like, like Lane's whole thing is like data is greater than your feelings. And it's like, yeah, it's sort of true. Like I hate to like dumb it down to that simple of a thing, but there is certain things in life quantifiably proven that your feelings don't really matter here.
Totally.
Like the law of thermodynamics, like it's, you're not in starvation mode. It's not why you're putting on fucking weight. It's not fucking true. Like
yeah,
it's not, regardless of what your feelings have to say about that.
Totally. I think it's interesting where we put so much, I made a tweet about this the other day, but we put so much energy and effort towards fighting for our limitations when we could put the exact same amount of energy and effort towards actually making progress.
Exactly. That's a good one.
And I think there's just, well, one, I think a lot of folks are really struggling and they want to lash out and have their limitations validated. One, because they don't want to, I think they don't want to do the work because they have a lack of clarity and they actually don't know what they want to pursue. But I think something that's really important for folks to also acknowledge is not only where they want to go, but where they don't want to go. I think that we have to, I think we don't have to, but I believe that having a pleasure-based goal and a pain-based goal is a way to have good balance. And I call it an anti-vision. So how do you absolutely know for certain you don't want your life to turn out like? And that's a lot easier for people to come up with than what they do want their life to turn out like. But I find it more important to actually come up with what people don't want. What It's more important for you to come up with what you don't want your life to turn out like, because it brings clarity to what you know you do want or you subconsciously want.
Yeah.
What you consciously don't want, at least subconsciously, is going to come out in some way, shape, or form. Because when we have an anti-vision, don't want to look like this, don't want to feel like this, don't want to do this, don't want to do that, want to work on this, that, and the other, health, wealth, relationships, and happiness. Just do the opposite of what the anti-vision says.
Yeah. And that's right. You said to you right before you said that, it's like, you don't have to, right? And that's the thing. You don't have to. But if you actually want to grow and evolve as a human, you do have to, right? And you know what? That's the sort of sad and unfortunate reality of the world as a whole, is that you don't have to want to strive for bigger things. You don't have to strive for happiness. No one's fucking forcing you to. But at the same time, too, don't get butthurt when you see someone online who is doing things to better themselves and then you lash out. Really, do you lashing out on some stranger online? Does that actually make you feel better about yourself? Like, no one feels better about themselves after lashing out at some stranger who, makes a post about how well their client did or how well their business did. I saw a fucking dietitian the other day post how she hates transformation pictures because they're so degrading. And it's just like, I don't agree with that in any way, shape, or form, to be blatantly honest with you, because if someone becomes insecure that I'm posting a transformation picture of my client, that's a you problem.
That's a reflection of them.
My client who put in the hard work to change her lifestyle, to be more active, to make better decisions so that she could live a longer, happier, more fulfilling life with her fucking kids. And that makes you insecure on your little phone across the city, across the world. That's a fucking you problem. Transformation pictures are extremely powerful tools. And that's the thing, is if you don't manage the actions that you're taking, how do you ever measure progress? This goes for business, this goes for personal growth, this goes for financial growth, this goes for anything. But if you don't manage it, how do you measure it? And I just, when I read that post, it was just interesting because it's the whole kind of anti-diet culture. God forbid you tell anybody to look at their macros and their calories and their intake. And God forbid you try to create any fucking level of self-awareness in an individual who has never spent any amount of time in their life trying to do so. Like, people who fat shame, it's just as bad as people who diet shame. There's nothing wrong with wanting to change your fucking life and make changes to your nutrition and your lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with that. There is disordered eating. There's also a lot of repercussions that come from not doing anything to change your health and fitness.
I think more folks need to just ignore like the dogmatic and ideological approaches of things and just realize that, I think the way I put it is health is wealth. And I actually refer to the body as a business. So when I'm chatting with like business owners or people that are just more pervy to business, I put the body as, if they're going to invest in a business, they're not going to just go by feeling. They're going to look at the data from the past to make an informed decision going into the future, right? To make an informed decision in the present to benefit the future. And I think the body is the exact same way, where if we are collecting data, we are making informed decisions. And I think that we put too much of an emphasis on, and it's it is because of the fact, in my opinion, that we actually live in such an easy time. Our brain's not wired for happiness and joy. Our brain's wired for misery and pain and just suffering. Like, it's the Buddhists say that to live is to suffer, right? But during that suffering, we get to choose what to do. And I think when I think that when people are just basing their decisions off of flaky feelings, and I refer to them as flaky feelings. I in my brain, I acknowledge my feelings as if they're different kind of characters. It's like a Star Trek cockpit. Like, there's the captain, my consciousness in the middle, and then there's like the supporting cast, which is the characters and stuff. And if I'm feeling, let's say unmotivated, and I will definitely say that I'm very anti-motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that motivation is just a flaky friend that is nice when when the friend shows up, but is not a type of friend to depend on.
Yeah.
And I look at all feelings as that way, where if I'm doing something, it's like, okay, let's fix it first and feel it later, and make sure that I do feel it later and process intentionally, like sit in it, feel it, but make sure the thing gets done first. It is just like, just go robot mode, feel it. And I think being able to have that that little balance makes it so that there's even a little 5-minute window of progress, and then feel it. But I think when we're trying to create decisions based off of how we feel, our feelings change every 20 minutes. If we just made decisions based off of how we felt, we would never get anything done because we would never feel like it. That was from Mel Robbins.
Yeah.
And I think there's just like a recklessness. There is I think there is a lack of, for myself at least, when I'm just doing things based off of how I feel like there's a recklessness and a lack of self-respect. And if I am not keeping promises to myself, then I'm not going to respect someone who doesn't keep promises. I'm not going to respect someone who lies. So why would I respect myself if I'm exhibiting the exact same behaviors? Even though nobody else would know it, I know it. I know it. And we chatted about it before pre-call, but I think it would be a cool thing to like talk about. But it was talking about anxiety and guilt and shame when you partake in an activity that you feel the guilt and shame, right? And so during your podcast, you mentioned that was when you started feeling it, it wasn't at first, you still had the well intentions, but then you recognize, I believe that's your subconscious saying, hey, here's a little guilt and shame to remind you, this is not the trajectory you wanted to go on, buddy.
Yeah. What are you really doing this for?
Totally.
Right. And that's kind of what it was for me, was hitting that point of just like, fuck, like this doesn't feel good. And again, from the direction that I want to take my life from a core value standpoint, I know that these actions that I am doing behind closed doors just do not feel right, which is then going to perpetuate that anxiety around the fact that I am continuing to make these decisions. And that's where, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet or was prior, but the radical honesty, right? Of just understanding that like you have to be radically honest with yourself if your anxiety is self-induced and the guilt and shame that you are feeling is self-induced. Because more often than not, I hate to say it, because of the world that we live in, and we're so, you talk about the pain pleasure balance. I just read the book Dopamine Nation, and she talks a lot about the pain pleasure balance. And we live in a society that is pleasure. All we do is chase pleasure. We chase dopamine. We fucking scroll social media for hours a day. We eat shitty processed food, gives us a massive dopamine spike. We scroll on Tinder, watch porn, online gamble, whatever it may be. And it's like, that's pleasure. And it's a seesaw. And if you don't ever chase pain in any sort of way, whether that be, pain can be spending 5 minutes alone with yourself. Pain can be looking in a mirror for 5 minutes and honestly looking at yourself in the mirror. For some people, that's fucking painful. Actually, sadly, a lot of people, it's incredibly painful. And I think that's where the practice of meditation is really, really impactful and powerful for people, because it allows you to realize that your feelings are not facts, but the decisions you're making behind closed doors, they are furthering the feelings. Because if you are making decisions behind closed doors that don't align with who you want to be and where you want to get to in life, of course your feelings are going to tell you that you're a piece of shit and that you're not worthy and that you don't deserve love and you don't deserve financial success and you don't deserve a good, happy, fulfilling life. Of course you're going to feel that way because you're making actions on a daily basis that perpetuate that. And that, the thing is, radical honesty is fucking painful. It's gross. It actually, the first couple of times you do it, it makes you feel sick to your fucking stomach. But then once you start being genuinely and radically honest with yourself, the massive amount of guilt, shame, anxiety that just falls off your shoulders is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I totally agree with that, because there is I definitely recognize the feeling that you're talking about, and it actually is it is a sensation, right? Because so before we started recording, this is where I was going to go. So this is pretty sweet, full circle, yeah. So I chose to do a whole year no alcohol, and it's been over a year now. Why is that? It's because I thought about it, and I thought about it for like a solid 3 months. I'm like, do I want to have another drink? Like, I'm stewing on it. I'm like, I'll just think about it, process. Do I want to do it? And I think that something that's really important to recognize is when our subconscious knows the right decision. I think our subconscious knows more than we can even fathom.
Mhm.
I think that there is like an inherent inner wisdom that not enough people tap into. And I think like the way I recognize it, and I've heard it before, is when you know you're on the right track, your body opens up and it expands. When you're doing the opposite of what you know you should be doing, your body contracts. And I think that works the same with decisions as well, where logically, this is where I think, and it's not listening to your feelings, it's listening to your body. It's listening to the whole vessel. It's thinking, it's like you feel it in your gut where it's like, logically, this is like an unreal deal, but like I'm not opening up. I have to say no. And for myself, whenever I thought, and even now, because when I went for a walk beforehand, when I was listening to your podcast, I was like, oh, this is an interesting question, because I wanted to bring it up. And it's like, do you want to have a drink? And I just closed in, and I could feel it. Like I feel it tighten up, and it's like a really small one. And we have to practice that. We have to practice listening to the body, right? But our inner like wisdom definitely has a really cool role to play if we're willing to have that honesty, that radical honesty, and the willingness to listen.
And so much of it is about eliminating the noise and distractions from your life. And I think that's the really difficult part of the world that we live in now, because as mentioned, I can, listening to your brain and your body is not fun. I would rather scroll social media mindlessly for 2 hours. I'd rather watch TV. I'd rather smoke weed. I'd rather drink alcohol. I'd rather do anything to avoid listening and feeling what my body has to say. And that's kind of, again, the sad reality is that so many people are just so fucking terrified to actually look inward and listen and feel what their body does have to say. And it, like you said it perfectly, practice, right? And that's the thing that I hate when people say, I just can't meditate. But have you really fucking tried? Because if you did it for like a week and you're just like, oh no, I suck at this. Well, fuck no shit. It's conditioned thinking. So if you're 30 years old and you've spent 15 minutes last week trying to meditate, you think you're somehow just gonna just sink right into meditation and get the full benefits of it? Like, you have to be diligent with your practice of it. And it's the big thing with that is it's practicing things for that delayed gratification, right? Because we live in a world of instantaneous gratification. And you're not going to ever really see true personal growth if you only chase things that are instant gratification. You know, we see it in our industry all the time. I want to lose 20 pounds in 20 days. Okay, like, why? First of all, well, I want to look good on my vacation in 20 days. It's like, okay, but like, you realize there's going to be a rebound effect where, you know, you just don't eat fucking food for 20 days. Yeah, you'll probably lose 20 pounds, but guess what? You'll go eat a fucking loaf of bread on your vacation, and all of a sudden you'll be 20 pounds heavier, right? Like, it's so important to practice and train our brains. Before we went live, we were talking about ADHD, and it's becoming very prevalent in this society. However, a lot of it is self-perpetuated based off of our choices and actions, because if there's a reason that neuroscientists are part of the creation side of these apps. TikTok is one of the most addictive fucking substances in the world. There's a reason that fucking neurological scientists are working on developing this app to make it more addictive. So if you don't read books, if you don't read blogs, if you don't spend time, you know, not letting your thoughts be guided by something, you're never going to be able to actually practice your ability to retain information and your ability to focus for longer periods of time. Like, that's the reality of it. And I think a lot of people, I was diagnosed with this ADHD last December 2021, technically. I had gone to see my psychiatrist. I did the full $1,000 fucking thing. It wasn't just like I went to my doctor. I was like, hey, you know, can I fill out like the 20 question questionnaire? Because with the world that we live in, I think if you all fill out that 20 question questionnaire, you'll all fucking think you have ADHD. And again, I do think a lot of people have it that just don't know. But at the same time, you have to diligently work to manage your ADHD or your ADHD tendencies, whether you do or don't have it. It doesn't just, you know, hop on some Vyvanse and all of a sudden, oh, I can focus for 7 hours straight. It's like, no, it doesn't fucking work that way. Because if I have my phone beside me and I have my alarms going off and my this shit, my here and here, like, doesn't matter how much fucking Vyvanse you're taking in a day, you're still not going to be able to focus for longer periods of time. You might be, if you learn to manage it and you read about it and you educate yourself on the topic of it. A book I brought up to you beforehand was Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate, and it's the origins of ADD and ADHD. And he talks about it in how it comes out in childhood, how it comes out in teenhood, or expresses itself in teenhood and expresses itself in adulthood. And then he talked diligently about how to manage it. And we had spoken about this prior, like, when you educate yourself on it, I actually believe it's more of a superpower than anything. I heard a really cool analogy with it where it's like a race car, right? You're a race car with shitty brakes. So basically, you know, you're on a circular track, you're a fucking race car, you got tons and tons of power, right? So especially if you find something that you're passionate about, fucking, you're all in. I'm going to focus crazy. I'm going to study. I'm going to do this and this and this and this. But the reality of that is that because you have shitty brakes, you're going to fall off track at some point in time. And that's where it's super important to learn different techniques to manage it, and doing things like meditation, doing things like, again, reading longer form content to allow yourself to recognize when you've actually fallen off track. Because a common characteristic with ADHD is we are very self-deprecating. And the more you perpetuate that belief that I can't focus and I suck at learning and I'm just stupid and blah, 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 well, that just furthers the feelings about how you actually feel about yourself. So if you can recognize, like, oh, you know what, I was really good for about 3 months here, and then I kind of just fell off the wagon. Instead of beating yourself up, be compassionate with yourself. Recognize that, yeah, you know, I did fall off the wagon a little bit. I let my nutrition go a little bit. Whatever your situation may be, recognize it, bring awareness to it, and then fucking get back on track. Right? And compassion is a really important word. And I know you had mentioned this before, but the reason I had titled that first episode back was Compassionate Relapse, was pretty much that exact reason, was the fact that, yes, I did relapse and I am aware of it, but I also recognize that there was things that I was doing, even though I wasn't happy and with my decisions behind closed doors with the relapse, I was also doing a fuck ton of learning. I wasn't creating content. I wasn't creating any sort of social media awareness or any exposure. All I fucking did for 6 to 8 months was read. So yeah, you know what? I wasn't creating content and I wasn't doing things that were going to necessarily further my business, but I was doing something behind closed doors that was going to allow me to, once I got back on track, be able to, further my perspectives and help people in a much more effective way. Because I think I read like 30 books in that 8 months. That was all I did was read, right? And educate myself. And it's important that you recognize that. And when you do it with compassion, you're able to come back on track a lot quicker. Because if I wasn't compassionate with myself throughout that time, understanding that that was a season that I was going through, then I probably wouldn't be 20 days up or cannabis free right now. Right? I'd probably be doing the same fucking shit. I'd probably be stoked that I don't have anyone after this and I'm going to go smoke some dope. Like, I'd probably be stoked about that. Right. But that's where, if you be compassionate with yourself, you can get back on track and get back to doing the things that feel good and are in alignment with your core values a lot sooner.
How did you come up with your core values? Because I actually find this. Oh, you still are kind of?
I was like, I'm still coming up. And that's a big thing actually that I'm like kind of currently working through with my therapist is I don't really know what my core values are. I have an idea of things that I want. For me personally, I don't think I want a family. Not that I want a family. I don't want kids. And that's one that is, I don't know if the word's controversial, but there's a lot of people, especially older generations, that like, well, what the fuck would you want to bring kids into this world? You're gonna be so lonely and blah 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 blah. And it's just like, at the same time too, I also have a level of awareness knowing that I would be a good dad if I won the lottery and all I had to do was be a dad. If I had to work full time and I had to run my two businesses and I had to continue taking care of my mental, physical, and emotional health, I probably wouldn't be a good dad.
You know what's funny? I sorry to interrupt on that one, but I have to actually share with you this too, because Kendra and I do not want to have kids. We got nieces. Solid.
I got 4. Yeah.
Perfect. So that's the thing, is we know the bloodline's still going, because that's one thing that people say is like, oh, well, what about your bloodline, your legacy? I'm like, what? It's not going to matter in 3 generations. That's the thing, is people think that we're going to be remembered 3 generations later, and we're usually forgotten. I don't know who my I don't even know who my great grandfather is, because I never met him. I knew my great grandmothers, but I've never met either great grandfather on. Oh wait, no, on my dad's side, I guess I did. But anyways, nonetheless, 3 generations, we're usually forgotten. So that's one thing that I think is silly that people talk about. And Kendra and I don't want to have kids either. We think that there's a lot of people that ask the question. I think controversial is kind of the right word, but I feel like it's lighter. I don't know what the word that's lighter than controversial is. But I actually think the exact same thing. I was chatting with my buddy Andy Blonsky. He's a chiropractor. You may have seen him. He was he won a YEG Fitness Award at 1.2. So you may have seen him just by fluke or something like that. He's a chiropractor. He's over in the Brewery District, I believe. And he's having a kid. And I ran into him and his wife, and she's like, she's gonna have it's like just ready to pop. Like, they're so close to having the kid. It's crazy. And Andy and I have chatted before, but his wife asked, are you and Kendra gonna have kids? And I'm like, no, we're not gonna. We just don't want them. She's like, oh, why is that? And I'm like, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I feel like I'd be like a good dad, but I don't need to be a dad to be a good role model. And that's what I really want. And then I followed it up with, I'm just really selfish. There's so many things that I want to do. And I love it that people want to have kids. All the power to them. It's just not something that floats my boat, because there is so many other things that I desire so much more that I do not want. It is a choice to accept a societal expectation.
I was going to say societal standard when you were talking was my thing. And it's because the sad reality too, is just a lot of people that just have kids to have kids because their parents have put this pressure on them or society has put this pressure on them. And I'm like, you realize that is why generational trauma exists. Like, you realize that you are perpetuating generational trauma because you're just bringing kids into this world because, well, that's what my parents wanted and what their parents wanted. And if I don't have, kids in a family, then I guess I'm not quote unquote successful. You're not a successful person if you don't have a family. And it's like, that's a fucked up, skewed way of looking at it, because just because you have kids doesn't mean, again, you're a good parent, especially if you're emotionally distant. If you're, it's a common thing. How old are you, Kyle?
32.
Me too. So
Nice.
I think a lot of things with our generation is that a lot of our parents, they look at themselves as great parents because they became great providers. And a lot of that is in the sense of a financial standpoint. So a lot, and again, not a lot, I guess, but some for sure came from homes that, they didn't have money. So then their belief was that to be a good parent, and I'm speaking from personal experience because this is my dad in a nutshell, was as long as I am a good financial provider, then I am a good father, right? All the whilst being an RCMP officer, moving our family all the fuck around Canada, not thinking about the repercussions that had on his children in terms of trust issues, stability issues, what that was doing to our family dynamic, any of that. But again, as long as I'm a good financial provider, that's what matters most. And in reality, like you said, the health, wealth, and relationships, you added happiness to yours. I look at health, wealth, relationships like a tripod, and it's like you have to have 3 legs for a tripod to stand. Just because you have wealth doesn't mean you have health or relationships, right?
Totally.
What happens to a fucking tripod that has 2 legs? Falls over, right? And this is where it's a weird societal standard that you should bring kids into this world. And it's just like, we also live in a fucking way different time when the world's goddamn expensive. Like straight up, if I make the money I make now 30 years ago, I'm fucking rich.
Right?
The money I make now, I live in a $1,200 a month basement suite. I'm not going to go buy some $180,000 house. The same $180,000 house costs like $560,000 nowadays. Like, it's an entirely different world that we live in. And again, where is the sacrifice? So then do I just say, okay, well, I need the white picket fence and the kids got to play fucking hockey and blah, 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 blah. So I guess now I need to actually strive to make $25,000 to $30,000 a month to provide for my family, which again, where's the sacrifice? If I'm working as hard as I have to make $25,000 to $30,000 a month, I'm going to be pretty fucking emotionally distant with my family because all I'm going to be doing is working.
Totally.
And again, that's just a level of self-awareness that I think a lot of people sadly don't have. And that's the reason generational trauma is a fucking cycle that just continues over and over and over and over again.
Ed Milet talks about being the one, and the one in essence is the one to take the reins and prevent and to refuse to perpetuate past problems into the present. And that's something I always refer to as well, is when we're reflecting and we actually decide to take past traumas. So I'm a weirdo, totally aware of this. I don't have a lot of nostalgia. I do not have a lot of ties to the past. There's music. Music for sure is the thing where I'm like listening to it and I'm like, fuck, that was such a great concert. But that's it. I don't have a lot of attachments to the past, and that's on purpose. And what I've recognized, and the reason being, is we cannot do anything yesterday. Anything that happened yesterday is gone. It's done. And there's nothing that we can really do other than recover what we can in here, because this is the only place that the past exists. Mm-hmm. So when we can recover from the past in here, because when we do that, then we're not perpetuating that problem. And I think, like, for myself, there is a solid chunk of experiences that I had as a young kid where someone else could be like, oh my gosh, how did you ever go through that? Oh my gosh, you were such a victim. And something that's interesting is, for the longest time, I looked at myself. This goes into what I was saying earlier about the ADHD and being weary of going to get a diagnosis, even though I can check off a bunch of, even though I can check off 20 boxes, to get a quick fix of whatever ADHD pills I would prefer. I don't know. I feel like there's a pretty good cocktail out there, but it's for a long time, or I'll finish that point first. I'm weary of doing that so that I do not take on the characteristics and traits of the diagnosis. Will I? Who knows if I would take on those characteristics and traits. But the thing I have to think of is it worth it for me to risk that? And for the longest time, going into my early 20s, I viewed myself as a victim and acted in accordance to being a victim. I was being a victim in accordance to what people were telling me. Oh, wow, you experienced X, Y, and Z. You're a victim. I behaved as such.
Yeah.
But I never felt like it. And I think that that's an interesting little conundrum where we got to be weary of the titles that we assign to ourselves, because we will behave in a manner that's similar to our beliefs, right? Because it goes beliefs, then it goes thoughts, then it goes actions.
Yeah.
And when we don't reconcile our beliefs and come up with our own beliefs, and I think what you said, I think the season of your life where you're taking in so much information, we cannot have any output without input. Yeah. We cannot create if we don't have inspiration. But people are trying to find inspiration in these quick fix dopamine social medias. Oh my gosh, we sound like such old people right now. No offense to old people. I love you all. But I think it is. And it's so interesting where I think like most of, like 1985, 1990, I think a lot of the kids during that time still had the cool combination of a world with technology and without technology. Yeah. And I think because of us having so much, this is a cool way of putting it, is because we have so much technology, we're not thinking as much. We don't need to. And our brains are not wired for effort. Our brains are lazy. So that's why if we're in behaviors that we perpetuate, it's because it's the easiest choice. It's difficult to change behaviors, but it only takes a little bit of time to change those behaviors. But something that I think is kind of cool, this is just a theory on my own, but there's a self-actualization, there's a radical honesty, there is self-analyzing, and it's not in a way of being critical and being mean. It's actually challenging the thoughts. I think challenging our thoughts is very, very important. I think that's one thing that's been really useful for me is I look at my thoughts and I treat it as a court case, thoughts and feelings, and I treat it as a court case. The thought comes up, then I think, is there any evidence to support that? No. Well, every court case is won off of evidence, not off of belief and feelings. And if we're able to change our beliefs and feelings to be able to, based off of actual, like what it is, then we can be unstoppable. It's just, I think it's just similar to, we just need to think more, critical thinking. And actually something that you mentioned in your podcast as well is, I forget exactly what it was, but it made me think of critical thinking. And you were like, we got to read these books in junior high or high school. And I think stuff where we talk about thinking should be even elementary. Like in elementary school, this is critical thinking. This is how you challenge your thoughts. This is where you try to find the proof. You investigate your thoughts. You don't just say, oh, I'm feeling this way. I guess that's just the way it is. I guess I'm like this forever. I might as well just get used to it because that's all. This is my life. That's it. And I think with us being able to have calculators on our phone, our grandparents are able to do mental math. I can't do mental math. I suck at math. I was in math 24. I could barely do math as is. So going from there, and then now we have Google that has all the answers. And now we have ChatGPT or AI that provides even better answers. And I think as we depend on technology more and more often, we're just going to be thinking less and less and less. So I think that everyone should absolutely have a season of life where they're reading a fuck ton of books, man.
And books, and what I was getting at in the podcast there was books that challenge your current beliefs and challenge your current perspectives. it's very easy to find, you can find research that validates your perspective. Researchers lie all the time, right? Like that's the funny part about, PubMed. You go search PubMed, you can find literally any study that, validates your current beliefs. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. Like, who was it funded by, right? Like, that's the big thing too, is like there's all these different factors that go into play. And that's why it's so important that when you're looking for information is like sift through a lot of information. Don't just actively seek information that confirms your biases and confirms your fucking validation, it confirms your current state of mind. Like actively look for things that are going to challenge it, because that's when you can then actually grow and evolve your own perspectives of the world and your own insights. And that's the really important part. And I know back to the Phoenix thing, it was all like, great, fucking just create content. Like, make sure you're putting out content all the time. And it's like, some of y'all need to shut the fuck up for a while, because that's why there's so much bullshit online, is that people don't take any time to shut the fuck up and educate themselves. They just speak purely based off of emotion and purely based off of personal experiences. And I'm not here to invalidate personal experiences. But at the same time, if you're creating content or you're putting a message out online in any way, shape, or form, you need to educate and use your experiences. It really shouldn't just be one or the other. And that's where it's so important to go through those seasons of shutting the fuck up and actually taking the time to educate yourself. And that's why I find it funny, almost like ironic in some of those, situations and environments where it's, you got to create. And it's just like, no, like some of you actually don't need to create right now. Some of you need to educate and then create. And it's really important that you take the time to diligently educate, not like kind of educate, but create. Like you can do one and then do the other. You don't have to do it all. You really don't, because the reality is you're going to do a very watered down, shitty version of both.
I totally agree with that. I like me, I'm in a season of learning right now. And I'm someone where I really like this analogy, the analogy of two lumberjacks that go into a forest. Might as well go with a metaphor time. Story time, folks. Story time. But there's two lumberjacks, right? There's a young guy, there's an old guy. There's a competition. Two lumberjacks go head to head. Who's the best lumberjack in town? They have 24 hours to chop down as many trees as possible. It's an AMTAP. As many trees. Yeah, it's an AMTAP. So 24-hour AMTAP. Go. They go. They're like chopping down trees. And the young guy, he like is going. And then he pauses for a second and he like here's a slight and he's like, oh my gosh, the old man is in the lot next to me. Okay, cool. So he notices that a tree is dropping every hour or so. And he's just chopping away. And he's like, there's no way in hell I am going to get beaten. And he keeps on going. And his hands are blistered. They're bleeding. He's sweating. It's hot. Keeps on going though. And then what happens is the 24 hours is up. The two get together. The old man, he's actually like just fine. It was just he didn't even do anything in the last 24 hours, it seemed like. So the young guy, he's like really pumped up. He's really stoked because he obviously outworked the older fella. So that is a clear indicator that he won. However, the old man won. Boom. You win. The kid, after eating a little bit of his humble pie, decided to walk over to the old man and ask, how? Like, how did you beat me? I was working my ass off. I could have sworn that I was going to beat you. And the old man said, in between those times where you heard the trees falling, I was sharpening my axe. So while the old man was sharpening the axe, the kid, the younger fella, the younger lumberjack, was beating away at these trees and the axe was getting more dull. So he was just using a blunt object to chop down more trees. When the old man was sharpening his skill, sharpening his tool to be able to not outwork, but outsmart the younger fella. And I think that that's a really good lesson in looking at not like the external, like how much effort we're actually putting outside, but developing the skills on an internal basis to actually understand where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, where our advantages, what are our threats, like a SWOT test basically. And I think being able to have that internal dialogue where it's like it's working with our mind rather than our mind working against us.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's really funny, and I'm just kind of thinking of this now, is that we put so much effort into trying to do the opposite of what our mind does. But I think our consciousness is strong in the way that we can choose what our body does. But I think that inner wisdom is like, it is stronger than any consciousness. It will make us suffer for not doing what we know we should be doing.
I talked about it earlier, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's essentially talking something, not necessarily from the metaphorical standpoint, but like if you don't ever take the time to slow down and listen to your body, like your body keeps the score. And there's a lot of interesting research and documentation at this point showing that, like, Crohn's, colitis, autoimmune, stroke, heart attack, a lot of that is from unresolved trauma, stress that we haven't taken the time to actually work through. And eventually the body keeps the score and it comes back to bite you in the ass. And that's why it's so important to actually slow things down, eliminate some of the distractions and some of the noise and some of the chaos in your life, and actually look inward, because it's pretty scary when you start to read those types of books. And not that I'm trying to put fear in people, but it's also like, we talked about this beforehand. It's we live in a society that praises workaholism, but demonizes addiction. It's the same fucking thing. How many workaholics do you know that are now suffering from Crohn's, colitis, stroke, high blood pressure, autoimmune? Even if they take care of themselves physically, it doesn't matter when you are doing everything in your power to avoid dealing with the internal stress and internal trauma that you had used the word earlier. It's like corrosive, right? It's toxic, right? You need to deal with it. And it's not fun. It's not painful. It's not quick gratification. Like, it's long hours spent with your therapist, spent with your psychologist, spent learning, spending time with yourself, not letting your thoughts be guided. I know we talked about this before, and I do the same with my clients. Is I try to get them to do just unguided walks. And essentially, there's no podcast, there's no music, just get the fuck outside and walk and let your thoughts just freely go, because your thoughts are trying to tell you something. But if you're constantly avoiding them, then you're never going to deal with them. Right. And then the deeper you can get into that, and that's where, whether you want to do seated meditation, walking meditation. I don't know if you've read any Brene Brown, but she talks about, like, she hates meditation, but she swims on a regular basis. And for her, that is active meditation. And I've felt similar benefits from swimming. I'm not a very good swimmer. So when I go swimming, like, what am I focusing on? Just fucking staying alive, like literally breathing and like swinging my arms, focus on my breathing. But for me, it allows me to actually silence a lot of the other bullshit because I'm only focused on my breath, right? So however you need to make it work for you, like, you have to find some sort of outlet that is going to allow you to silence and get rid of all the distractions and all the bullshit so you can actually listen to yourself.
I completely agree with that. I definitely think there should be some sort of a mindfulness practice in everyone's life. And I think that too many folks, and I'll put like mindfulness with rest as well, because there's a rest and recharge where you're debriefing.
Yeah.
Right. I think a buddy of mine, I think it's called war washing. A buddy of mine, Brian, that I had on a podcast, he was talking about how, because he was in the military, and after every deployment, they would get together, debrief, and any frustrations, any issues, any complaints, anything that happened during the deployment, they would deal with in that room, and they would not leave until it's all done. But the second they left that room, it's done.
Yeah.
And I think when people think rest and recharge, I know this is silly, but people view scrolling social media as a form of resting and recharging. And I can understand when people have the intention of, I'm going to be on this to rest and recharge rather than distract and direct. And I think that's still not a very, very good way of resting and recharging, even though we're usually stagnant and like sedentary when we're scrolling often. And I think it's really like there's nothing bad in it at all. I think you're guilty of it. I'm definitely guilty of it. I think most people are guilty of it, where they're just scrolling on something at some point in time. Where I think the biggest eye opener for me was when I looked at how much time I actually spent on my phone, and then I replaced that with walking and audiobooks, or
And it's
just
important.
walking.
And it's an important thing to note with that too is the media that you're consuming. So if your social media feed is all great stuff, it's puppies and it's laughter and it's happiness, great. But if you're following people that are making you question your self-worth and that are making you feel less than or less capable than, like, you're just lying to yourself if you were calling that rest and relaxation. Because when you go scroll for an hour and a half, if you don't feel better about yourself, you don't feel rested and relaxed, you actually feel worse about yourself,
Mhm.
then that's not rest and recovery and relaxation, right? So that's where, it's a for who and for what. And it's very much like you dictate what your social media feed shows you. So if you want to use it in a therapeutic, relaxing, restful way, you better audit the fuck out who you're following and the media you're consuming. Because again, you are perpetuating your own lack of self-belief if you are following people and accounts that make you feel like a piece of shit.
I was listening to a podcast. It was The Art of Manliness. Was it The Art of Manliness? Yeah, something like that. I've been listening to that guy's. I forget his name. Something. That's so funny. But anyways, he had a guest on his podcast, and they were talking about apps, and they were talking about social media. And the thing that he said that I thought was a standout was that social media is personalized. It is not personal.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think a lot of people understand that these social media platforms, these algorithms, there's only, like what you talked about TikTok earlier, how it's designed to suck us in. And there's three main points. And this was actually something I was come up with like a while back. And so a while back, and it was, you want to find something that's simple, so scrolling, something that's flashy, pops, and then something that it gets our attention, so notifications. So do you ever notice how the notification pops up on our phone, then we go into the app, and then it takes a couple of seconds, and then the notification pops up? So it's personalized. So, and then the algorithms also looking at what we're spending time on, and it feeds us more of whatever we're looking at. And it's interesting because when we're looking at stuff that's more negative, then there's going to be more negative stuff on our feed. And then we look at the whole world like, oh my gosh, our world's a whole piece of shit. I am very, very strict with my social media consumption, where I like to keep my time, because I like to look at like, oh, what's my screen time at this week? I look at that as a data point to see if I'm distracting or directing, or like trying to create, or if I'm trying to escape.
Yeah.
And so um I think that that's something that's really important to monitor as well, is like, oh my gosh, why are you consuming so much stuff that's not helping at all? I surround myself with, what the hell is that? I surround myself with people that I aspire to be like, or they are role models or mentors on social media. They inspire. I'm inspired by the people that I see on social media for the limited amount of time I spend on it.
Can I tell you an interesting takeaway that I had from Phoenix?
Hell yeah. Oh yeah, when we're talking about Phoenix, we were actually at a mastermind. We were checking out our buddy Coates. He did great, performed well, spoke well, I guess. It wasn't a performance, but he was also on the podcast too. Yeah, so it was cool. But
And for
anyways,
me, one of the biggest takeaways from it was actually seeing these people who I respect, and I thought I looked up to them and I thought I aspired to be them, when in reality, once you see them in person, you realize they're just people. And another reality was kind of what I was talking about earlier with the sacrifice. Other than, I'm pretty sure Jordan Syatt, who's my business coach, by the way, and Jordan's a fucking stud, every single speaker on stage has gone through one, if not two divorces, or was either single. So for me, a big takeaway was that for someone who does want a relationship and does want a trusting, healthy relationship and partner, do I really want social media fame? And I kind of say that in air quotes, social media fame and quote unquote status. And that's what I had mentioned earlier was like, there's 450 people in that room, a lot of people who made lots of bucks, a lot of people who deep down don't have the awareness to realize that they're very unhappy and they're chasing something that, society and social media thinks that you want. But if you're chasing something that doesn't align with your core values, and again, I'm still figuring mine out, but it's funny because I went to a mastermind in Phoenix and the one takeaway I had was, or not the one takeaway, but the biggest takeaway I had was realizing like, I don't want a lot of what those people had, to be blatantly honest with you, because that's sacrifices that, again, if I want a healthy, loving relationship, like, it's fucking hard nowadays when you have 100,000+ followers to have a trusting, loyal relationship that doesn't have a lot of fucking issues. Because when there's so much disposable influence in every direction of your life, it's really hard to have a loving, trusting relationship. And it's kind of a sad reality of it. And the world that we live in is like, the more fame you get, a lot more opportunity out there. Doesn't mean it's opportunity that you want, but there's a lot more opportunity out there. Right. And I don't know, it's almost kind of like I'd come home and tell some people that. And it was like, man, that was not the takeaway I expected from that weekend. Like, I'm there thinking I'm going to fucking learn something crazy about nutrition or some shit like that. Nope. That was not my takeaway. Like, and it was just, again, it was really interesting to see. And I think that's the thing that's important for people to expose themselves to those types of environments so that you can really actually get a better understanding of like, do you want what those people have, or do you just think that you want that?
Well, my friend, that is a fantastic thing. That is a fantastic note that we will end on for sure. I think that was I completely agree with you. Going towards an optimistic note for the same takeaway. What I learned from the speakers in Arizona is a positive takeaway is the well intentions behind the actions, even if there's chaos in their life. So they all want to make the world healthier, for example, or people become healthier and stuff like that. I think that's good, but I totally agree. Like when you actually like hang out with people, now that you chatted about it, now that you really, when you actually see the truth of your perception, then that's when the walls start coming down and then you start thinking, oh, maybe I should filter this a little bit more. But my friend, I have 2 questions for you. It's the questions I'll ask everybody. Might change over time. We'll see what it's at episode 100. But first one, you're on your deathbed, my friend. Obviously not surrounded by family. Just joking. Or at least biological children. This sounds dark. But I'll be there. Why not? But on your deathbed, there's no content of yours exists. This podcast doesn't exist. Your podcast doesn't exist. What's the lesson that you want to pass on?
I just want to note that I've been painfully and grossly honest with myself and the people around me, and that I didn't just bullshit my way through life, creating this falsified perception of who I am and the impact that I have left, whether it be positive or negative.
Nice. That's really good. And then the final question, how would you define living a limitless life?
Oh, God. The ability to do, very, I guess, like the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, whether it be travel, whether it be taking a year off and doing sweet fuck all and not feeling this inner pull that I need to create content or I need to further my business or I need to do anything along those lines. Just the ability to do what I want, but also not to sacrifice things that I currently have to do so.
I think that's fantastic, brother. So Was it Maxime Laroque?
Maxim.
Maxime Laroque. Max Laroque, my man, thank you very much for being on this podcast. I just want to acknowledge you and say that you are doing very good stuff. I think that you are being a role model. You're living a congruent life. And I think that that's something that a lot more people are becoming more aware of, but there's still not enough people doing it. And I like to say that you are definitely one of the people that I admire and respect for living a congruent life. You live what you say and you say what you mean and you mean what you say. That was all a little clusterfuck, but nonetheless, I think that you have a big heart, you have a good soul, you have good intentions. I think that you are certainly going to be doing some pretty awesome things. And I'm very excited to see the things that you do.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words, Kyle. As mentioned, I'm 20 days cannabis free, so I'm definitely not wanting to put myself on a pedestal like I'm perfect by any means. And I try to make that really clear in the message that I do put out there, that I have lots of flaws, I have lots of faults, and I am just working on myself on a day-to-day basis to be as congruent and authentic as I possibly can, so that those people who are working with me or, you know, inspired by my content want to do the same. Because I think that from an impact standpoint is going to be much more beneficial than not.
I totally agree with you, brother. So where should people go to find you?
My Instagram is Max Laroque Fitness. My website, actually, same thing, maxlaroquefitness.com. Starting to get a little bit more into the blogging side of things. And then my podcast is Squats and Sober Thoughts. And then if you are in the Edmonton area and you want to come check out a gym, we are located at 11507 120th Street Northwest. And again, we are free fitness. Come check us out. My dog's always there. We're a pretty fucking dope gym, not gonna lie.
That's pretty awesome. How do you spell your last name?
Laroque.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, sir. Well, for those of you that are listening and or watching, be sure to like, subscribe, comment with your favorite takeaway. Let me know what you think. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review. You can tell me how much you love it. You can tell me how much you hate it. You can tell me all the things about it. I can handle it, you know. So outside of that, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope your day treats you as good as you look. So have yourself a good one.
Cheers, buddy.